Hey everybody, what's going on? Eric here with Switch Adapted Toys, and today I'm going to be showing you how to adapt the Vtech Jot Bot. This looks like a really fun toy. Basically, it'll draw pictures on paper for you, and it sings and kind of dances as it goes along. I have never adapted this toy before, so we'll figure it out together. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. It really does help us out in a big way, so thanks in advance for that. So without further ado, I guess let's get into it. So I mentioned that this was the first time that I've adapted this toy, and I realized I made some mistakes along the way. You do not need to remove the back of the toy like I am doing here. In fact, it might make it actually easier if you don't do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead to where we need to start, but you'll see throughout the video that the back of the toy is taken off and it's just kind of a mess. So just disregard that. Don't get confused. We really only need to deal with the head portion of the toy. So there's some screws that are underneath this sticker that's on the face. So I'm just going to use a little screwdriver, a tiny little precision screwdriver, and I'm just going to try to slip it underneath this sticker so I can start kind of peeling it back. So once I get it started, I'm going to just peel it off. Alright, I'm going to set this aside and try to keep it sticky still. And you can see now that there are a bunch of screws underneath here. Alright, so with those 4 screws removed, we can then remove the face of the toy. And we can remove the top of the head. And on this circuit board, there are a couple screws that are holding the circuit board down to the plastic on the top that we need to remove. Alright, so there were 3 screws that were holding that down, and then I can remove the plastic on the top of the head. Alright, so with the top removed, you can see that it exposes these buttons down here. And this is the go button. I think this is going to be the best one for us to adapt. When you put a cartridge in, you can hit go and then it will draw. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this little sticker that is on this circuit board. There we go. And that exposes this disc down here. Now this disc has got 2 parts. It's got a center and an outside ring. Basically, whenever you press one of these buttons, it makes contact with the center and the outside of the ring, and then it completes the circuit and goes off. So this is what we're going to solder our headphone jack wires to. 1 wire will need to be on the center dot, and 1 wire will need to be on the outside ring. First, we need to figure out how we're going to get our wire into the toy. I think the best place for us to drill our hole is actually going to be through the front of the toy. The reasons for that is there's just not a lot of space between the circuit board and the top of the toy. You might be able to drill a hole directly through that button, but I just don't know if that's going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole here through the front of the toy, and that will allow me to get my wires in underneath these buttons, and we're going to give it a shot. What I'm also going to have to do is drill a hole through this front sticker, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is actually put it back in place, just kind of lightly. I'm not going to try to glue the whole thing back down, but that way I can drill through both. Alright, now we can get our headphone jack wire into the toy, but before we do that, we need to prep our headphone jack wire. So I'm going to set all this aside and we'll do that now. Alright, so I've got my headphone jack wire, and I need to remove the outside casing. And I'm going to remove quite a bit, because I need to get underneath those buttons, and I think just having the single wires will be a lot easier than trying to get this big thicker wire through there. So I'm going to remove that outside casing. So inside our headphone jack wire, there are 3 wires. You can see we have a white wire, a red wire, and then all of these just bare wires. The wires inside your headphone jack might be completely different. So basically what we need to do is isolate which wire goes to the tip of the headphone jack. Because many of the headphone jacks that we can get easily are what are called TRS connectors. It stands for tip, ring, and sleeve. But many of the buttons that we use are just TS, so they just have a tip and a sleeve. So what we need to do is isolate which wire goes to the tip and then combine the ring and sleeve wires. Now how are you going to do that? Well, what you need to do is remove some of the casing on each of your wires and test it. Combine two of them and hook it up to a toy and see if that'll work, if that combination works. If it doesn't, try a different combination. We've used these wires before, so I know I need to combine the red wire and the bare wires together and leave the white wire separate as the tip wire. Now, we've done a lot of these and we found that most of the time if you've got a white wire, that will be the tip wire, but that's not always the case. So I would start there and try that first, and if it doesn't work, then move on to a different combination. In order to combine my two wires, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of the casing on the red wire, and then I'm going to just twist them together, making sure that those bare wires make contact with one another. Alright, now this is great, except I've got a bunch of exposed wire here, so I'm going to use a heat shrink wire cover to basically put a sleeve back on that wire and protect it, so that it doesn't accidentally touch something else in the circuit board and short something out. So I've got myself some heat shrink wire cover. I'm just going to basically cut it to the length that I want, and I just want the tip of the wire exposed, maybe 1/4 inch. And I'm going to slip it over. And then I'm going to use a heat gun to shrink that down. Okay, and then I just want to remove a little bit of the white wire, the casing on the white wire, just like that. Alright, so now we can fish our headphone jack wire through the hole that we drilled in the toy. Alright, and what we want to do is we want to use a zip tie around the wire on the inside of the toy, and that will basically act like a barrier. So if the child were to pull on the cord, it doesn't just yank the whole cord out of the toy. Alright, so I'm just going to slip my zip tie over the wire, cinch it down real tight, and I'm going to snip off the extra zip tie. Now, what I like to do is add a little bit of CA glue or super glue around that zip tie just to make sure it gets locked in place and it doesn't slip. So I'm just going to add a little CA glue around that zip tie. And then I'll use a little activator to make sure it dries real fast. Alright, so now we're ready to solder, and what I like to do first is just make sure my wires are nice and neat. You don't want a bunch of stray wires around, hanging out, so I'm just twisting them together to make one nice neat wire. And I've got a little extra on this white wire. I'm just going to snip it off. I really don't want a lot of wire exposed because it's going to be kind of going across that circuit board, and I just don't want it to accidentally touch something. Alright, so before I actually put the wire to the board, I want to do a couple things. What I like to do is I like to add a little bit of solder on the wires themselves and a little bit of solder on the disc. That just makes it easier when I'm going to put my wire to the board. It just makes things a lot easier. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some solder on my wires. So what I like to do next is use a flux pen to put some flux on the circuit board. This just kind of helps me prevent things from burning when I go to solder it, and it kind of cleans that disc off a little bit so I get a nice easy connection. Now what I like to do is get a little bit of solder on the discs themselves. Sometimes this is easier said than done, but if I can get some on there, it definitely helps when I go to get the put the wires on. So I'm just making sure that that solder does not cross from the center circle to the outside ring. Alright, so now with that in place, I can go ahead and solder my wires. Alright, so you can see I got the wires hooked up and no solder is touching both sides of that disc. So what I want to do now is plug in a button and just make sure that it works before we go ahead and put everything back together. There we go. Alright, so now on the button itself, we want to remove this little tab here. That way it doesn't just accidentally knock off our connections. So just like that, with a pair of snips, comes right off. Alright, so these are just inherently like weak connections. There's just not a lot there that the solder is grabbing onto. So we want to make sure that everything stays put. So what I'm going to do is use some hot glue, and I'm going to put just a big old glob of hot glue on there just to lock everything in place. One thing I want to be careful of is not letting the tip touch to the soldering points. It could reheat them and it could make them come loose. So just be careful of that and add a big old glob of glue. Just like that, and then I like to let it cool just a second before I use just my finger to kind of press it all down. Just kind of keep it nice and tight close to the circuit board. Alright, so now probably the hardest part is putting it all back together. I put the buttons back in the top plate, and I'm going to try just to kind of setting it on the circuit board because this whole thing has to be kind of slid into place. And now's the time that you want to screw in the circuit board back into the top plate. I didn't do that here, but it'll make it a lot easier if you do that now before you try to slide it back into place. Okay, and then the face can go back on, just like that. And now remember the screws were underneath this sticker, so I'm gonna have to kind of pull this sticker back so that I can screw in the 4 screws in the head. Alright, now we can put the sticker back down. Alright, so that's basically it. I'll show you kind of what it does because it's a pretty unique toy. It's pretty cool. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. It really does help us out in a big way, so thanks in advance for that. If you want to find out more about Switch Adapted Toys, you could do so on our website at www.switchtoys.org. We have a bunch of resources on there, completely free. We've got a bunch of how-to videos, written manuals. We even have files for you to 3D print your own Switch button. And again, completely free, so check those out. If you're in the market for a Switch Adapted toy and you just don't want to go through the hassle of adapting one yourself, we do have an Etsy shop where we sell some pre-adapted toys that are ready to play with. The proceeds there basically go to support what we're doing here. So I'll put a link in the description below if you want to pick one of those up. Finally, if you've got a group or an organization and you want to adapt toys kind of on a bigger scale, you can form what we call a Switch chapter. And that's where we kind of help you, and we've got a bunch of resources for you so that you can serve your community in that way. And you can find more information about that on our website at, again, www.switchtoys.org. I guess that's it. I'm Eric with Switch Adapted Toys, and until next time, I'll see you.
Let's draw unicorn. Press the go button when I can start drawing.
Switch Adapted Toys, making play possible.
I like to draw, let me show you. It's so much fun, you can draw with me too. There's